Hi and welcome to another tutorial from Homs. Today we're looking at the fire and smoke tutorial updated. This is a redo of a prior fire tutorial I did about 2 years back now, and I've learned a lot more about the mechanics of Blender, and I want to share with you a more organic way to animate this fire. In addition, we're going to add some animated textures to this fire to give it a bit more oomph, right, to the animation. So let's start with the layout. I've drawn the fire, scanned it into the computer, vectorized the illustration in Inkscape. Then, using the SVG import feature in Blender, this is the regular SVG import, not the grease pencil one. I then imported the prepped file into Blender. If you want to know how I prep an Inkscape file for Blender import, you can check this video here. Next, because this is a regular SVG import and not a grease pencil one, we need to first separate each curve object to its own Z-plane transform. That way, Blender doesn't confuse the object's hierarchy and create unnecessary or unneeded or unwanted artifacts. Once done, we need to convert our inner and outer flames from curves to meshes. To do this, we just select the curve we want to convert. In object mode, press F3 on our keyboard for the search option and search for the convert curve to mesh function. Once converted, we want to make a specific change. What we need to do is dissolve the internal edges of our new converted mesh, and we do this by going into edit mode and selecting all of the vertices in our new mesh. We can do this by pressing A, but often enough when we go into the mesh they're already selected for us. Alright, if they are then press X on our keyboard and select the limited dissolve option. This will remove all of the unwanted topology generated from our curve to mesh conversion. Keeping the topology might affect the animation negatively, so it's best to remove it. Do the same for the inner flame. Next, it's time to create our smoke. So we're just going to create a plane, and once we create that plane, we're just going to align it so that it's aligned with the fire that we have on our screens, and we're going to scale this plane on the y-axis. I go to edit mode and I just select the two top vertices and select them, box select them with B, and just use G and Y to just scale them along the y-axis, making sure that the bottom of the box is touching the top of the fire and the top of the box is touching beyond the camera view, right? So about that length. Once you've done that, we're going to select the two vertices at the bottom of the box of the plane, and then we're just going to press S and X and scale them in so that we have something that looks like a upside down triangle. You can see how it looks on my screen, and then you can try your best to get the smoke to look similar to that. Once we've done that, we want to select the bottom left vertice and the top left vertice, and we're going to subdivide that. And to subdivide, we just simply press W and then press S. W brings up the options for the vertices, and S allows us to subdivide them. Once we subdivide it, press S and subdivide them, we'll see a dialog box at the bottom left corner. We can select that dialog box and go to the area that gives us a number for cuts, and we're going to enter in 10 cuts, so that's 10 for the left. We're going to repeat the process for the right and make sure we have 10 cuts or subdivisions on the right. That's the right edge, the right vertice, the right bottom vertice and the right top vertice. Good, so that we have 10 on both sides. Once that's done, we've finished with the layout, and we can move on to the next step where we're going to look at the modifiers that we're going to need to animate. That's the wave modifier and the splice modifier for the tutorial. Alright, let's start with the outer flame. First, we're going to create a plane and place it to the side of the camera view. Under the viewport display settings for the plane, we want to select the drop down menu that says display as. Good, and we want to display it as a wire. We will need this plane for later. Next, with the outer flame selected, we're going to go to our modifiers tab and choose the displace modifier. In the displace modifier settings, we want to press new for our new texture, then set the coordinates of that texture to the object that we've just created. Once the texture is created, navigate to the texture tab and select the drop down menu where we will see a texture we just created. In the type drop down menu, select Stucci, right? So that's STUCCI, and enter the parameters shown on your screen. This is to replicate the results I have, right? But this is the time where you can go in and play about with the settings and choose a different drop down menu. You don't have to check Stucci, you can check different one and see what kind of results you get for your flame. This is just the results that replicates what I've done for my tutorial. Okay, if you find yourself doing the distortion and you're getting some wild results, it may be good to look at the scale and the location data that's presently used for your fire, for your flame. So in this instance, the distortion's kind of all over the place, and that's because we scaled the flame up. So the best way to solve this is to apply the scale so it goes back to a 1:1 scenario. You can do that by pressing Shift and Control and A, and then you just apply the scale, and we see that it's gone back to normal. That the same thing goes if the flame goes all the way to the left or right. You want to make sure that you do that, and just apply the location, and you should get better results. So if you see here now, when we move it around, we see that the flame looks okay. Alright, but you want to just be cautious about that. So if you find yourself in that situation, just apply the scale. Cool. Also, when adding the vertex groups, you want to, for the increase for the further part in the tutorial, you want to make sure that, by applying the weight paint, you want to make sure that you make a vertex group. So to do that, you want to just press tab to go to edit mode, make sure all the vertices are selected, then go down to this, the data properties, and you want to go to vertex groups, and you want to press plus, yeah, and have a group here. Then you want to assign the vertex selected to this group. So you're going to press assign, and if you want to know if it's really assigned, yes or no, you can deselect them and then reselect, and if it does reselect all of the vertices that you did select assign, then you know that it's been successfully assigned. Then when you're in the displace modifier, you want to go down to the vertex group and enter in the group that you entered in here. Without this, displace modifier won't be able to recognize the weight paint changes, and this is totally necessary for you to have the flame move the way you need it to move. Cool. Done. You will see the flame visually distort. This time you can move the plane that we created earlier to see the flame animate. It will animate with the texture distortion. To have a continuous animation, you can animate the plane on any axis. I chose the y-axis and selected linear animation, but you don't have to do that. Right? Now if I want continuous, I select linear animation. I use y-axis in my graph editor, but you have to make sure that you set keyframes to the plane before you do this. And once you change it from Bezier to linear animation, you want to go into the channel drop down menu and select linear extrapolation, right? And that will have a continuous movement along whatever axis you set. Once done, you'll notice that the flame is animating, but not as a flame should, as the bottom of the flame is moving with the same kind of distortion as the top. But in real life, the flame at the bottom doesn't move with that type of distortion. The top is more affected by the wind than the bottom. So to replicate this real life phenomena or effect, we're going to use weight paint. So first select the outer flame and then go into the weight paint mode found on the top drop down menu. We're essentially painting the weight on the mesh, where blue or 0 for strength is the heaviest and red or 1 for strength is the lightest. The wind or the displacement will affect the light area most, and the heavy area least. We set the colors with the values 1 to red and 0 to blue, so we want a gradient from top to bottom of the outer and inner flames, where the bottom is blue and the red is top. Now we can see the animation of the flame moves as it should. Next, let's add a wave modifier to our smoke line. These are the settings I used. Once entered, you should get something that looks like what I have on my screen now. But you can play about with the settings similar to the distortion settings to see what you can get for yourself. But I found that this is the most usable. Then we're going to select the drop down menu at the bottom of the wave modifier, and we're going to select the speed, and we're going to slow down that speed to this parameter also. And that will give us the smoke effect that we have. So now we have the smoke animated and we have the flame animated. You have to be careful with the parameters for the wave animator and the smoke, because the wave animator will, even for the distortion as well, it will cause the vertices to collapse on each other. Excuse me. And that will give you kind of artifacts in your animation. You can even see some in my smoke at the top. Yeah, but so you want to be careful of that, right? Make sure that your vertices are spaced enough so that you don't get collapsing on each other, right? Now, to make the animation smooth for both of them, right, I simply just go into the modifiers tab and I add subdivision surface to both the smoke and the flame, and that makes the animation overall a bit smoother. Right? Cool, so that's the end of this section. The next section we're going to animate the embers, and that's going to be a quick section, and then after that we're going to go into the texture animation. Okay, we're going to move on to the ember section of the animation. This is nice and simple. So we're going to add a shape key first to the outer flame, and we have two peaks on the outer flame. We have the left peak and the right peak. You'll see the right peak is slightly lower than the left peak. What we want is for the outer flame to go up and down as the distortion is happening. So with the shape keys, we're going to create two shape keys, one for the left peak, one for the right peak, and we can name them that way too. And we're just going to grab the vertices on the left peak and lift it up and carry it down a bit, and then set the first shape key. And then for the second shape key, which is the right peak, we're going to carry it down, do the same thing, just carry it down a bit. So that way the flame goes up and down with the distortion. And that also helps to make the flame look a bit more real, because it adds a vertical motion to the already horizontal motion that the distortion has created for us. Right? So with that, you want to make sure that now that we have that, we can animate the peaks. Good. Then you're going to duplicate the fire, and you're going to flip the fire along the z-axis. So we want the fire going looking with the peaks at the bottom, and then we're just going to move the flame up to create the ember, and then we're going to scale it down, and it's just going to be a smaller version of the flame, just inverted. Once we've scaled it down, we're going to do it so that it's at both of the sides of the peaks. So we're going to have one ember for the left peak, one ember for the right peak, and then we can think about how we're going to animate it. Now, because the embers are using the same distortion as the displacement, as the main flame, the main outer flame, it's going to look like when we animate it out of the flame, it's going to follow the distortion path, and it's going to look like it's a natural ember out of the flame. All we have to do now is animate the y-axis as we move the flame up, ember up, and then animate the scale so that it disappears over time. With that, we just duplicate what we've done. And so we just duplicate the keyframes of this, and we should get something that looks like this. And that is essentially the amber section and the flame shape key section. In the next Alright, so we're moving into our shading and texture animation section. So to do that, we have to go into our shader view workspace. we have our workspace open now, but if you don't have yours open, you can find it in the top here, top tab, or you can press the plus button here, go to general, and then go to shading workspace. Now when you open up the shading workspace, you'll be greeted with two windows, two viewports, the 3D viewport and the shader viewport at the bottom. So what we want to do, because we want to be using the shader viewport the most here, it's going to scale this up so that we can see what we're doing here in the shader viewport better, but we still have the 3D viewpoint to see what's going on. So I have two nodes here connected at the moment. You may see principal BSDF, or you may not see one connected any at all. If you don't, you want to click use nodes up here, and then you can begin to follow this part of the tutorial. So first, we're just going to decouple this emission shader here, and we're going to add a texture coordinate. We're going to hit Shift and A, making sure our mouse is hovered along the workspace for the shader menu in the shader viewport. Then we're going to search for texture coordinate. Good, and that's going to drive the coordinates for our Musgrave texture and our gradient texture, because essentially that's what we're going to be doing in this tutorial. We're going to be combining the Musgrave texture and the gradient texture such that the gradient texture controls the Musgrave texture in the way it appears. So we're going to do that by adding two mapping nodes. We can duplicate the mapping node by holding it, pressing it, and then pressing Shift and D. Good, and then we're going to join the object to the vector of the first and second mapping node, and then we're going to add a texture, change this type here to texture, this drop down from point to texture. Then we're going to go ahead and add a Musgrave texture node here, and we're going to join the vector to the vector for the Musgrave texture, and then we're just going to go ahead and add a gradient node. We'll Shift A, search gradient texture node, and we're going to join the vector to the vector down here. So the bottom will be the vector control for the gradient, and the top will be the vector control for the Musgrave texture. Cool. So for the next part of this, we want to go ahead and add a mix color, and that's how we're going to join these two together. I'm going to add a mix color node here, and we're going to join the height to the B, and so the output of the Musgrave height to the B input of the mix, and the output of the color gradient texture to the A input of the mix color. Cool. Next I'm going to add a color ramp. Whoopsie. Yes. Add the color ramp here. And then after that we're going to be adding a emission shader. I have one up already. So if you don't have one up, you need to hit Shift and A and find the emission shader, and we're going to add a mix node, a mix shader, sorry. So type in mix shader. Cool. So we're going to join the result of the mix color to the FAC of the color ramp, the color to the first shader input, the alpha to the FAC input, the emission output to the shader input at the bottom, and the shader output to the surface of the material output. So not going to see much of a change in the flame here. It's going to look orange just like before, but the magic comes in what we do with the parameters of this setup. So the first thing we're going to do is go to the color ramp, and we want to make the white alpha. Cool. And by alpha, we just reduce it to 0. You also want to make sure that you have blend mode activated in your material, and it should be activated as alpha blend. By default it will be opaque, so you want to change this to alpha blend, and when we do that we can see the texture begin to show through our flame. Cool. But we're going to have to do some more to make the texture look the way you need it to. So we're going to change the FAC of the mix to about 0.3. Cool. Then we're going to go ahead and change the gradient from linear to easing so that we have a smoother gradient. Then we're going to move on to the scale here. Just delete this here, and we're going to make the scale negative and give it a high value like 70, 74, and we can see our texture shown on the right hand side here, but it's moving from right to left, but what we really want it to move is from up down. So we're going to go to our mapping for the texture. We're going to go to the gradient part of our mapping. Good. And we're going to rotate this along the Z by -90, and that will give us the pattern from the bottom. So essentially now we're just going to be messing about with the parameters now to change the colors and to get the look that we want. So the first things that I'm going to show you is this. I'm going to change the color of this ramp here so that we get a bit more of a red, and we want this black to be not black but say an orange. Cool. And we want the orange to have a little bit more punch. Yeah. And then if you want to change how deep this red goes, alright, just a bit so that we can see the contrast a bit more. So if we want to change the scale of it, we can, and we can see that we get the scale to change nicely. Alright, so we can get thicker results. If we want to move the gradient texture by animating it, we can animate the Musgrave texture mapping node. If you want to move the texture entirely, alright, we can use the mapping at the bottom here, move along the Y and X axis here. Cool. And we can also scale it as well, and we can do quite a bit with all of this to get a gradient that we look. So we're gonna that we would like the look of. So we're gonna apply this to the rest of the elements here. I'm gonna apply this to the inner flame and the smoke, and that will give us something that looks like this. Right. So if you follow the parameters that I put on my screen, right, you should be able to get this. And if you want to animate this now such that you have the texture animated, you can animate quite a few options here, but I opted to animate the Y rotation or the Y location here for the flame because it's moving up. I think this looks like a flame. Cool. But you can animate quite literally any parameter here. Alright, so this is the end of the shading tutorial and the fire and smoke tutorial. So if you enjoyed the tutorial, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate that. Or you can become a Patreon member to see the content early access. And also, right, we went through the grain texture pretty quickly here, but we'll have a dedicated tutorial for the grain texture so that you can learn a bit more about it individually. But for now, until I see you again with another tutorial, get up and design a new dawn. Later.